The ancient Egyptians did not believe death was the end. They believed it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Because in ancient Egypt, dying was easy. What terrified them was what happened next. If you failed the afterlife, you weren't punished. You weren't tortured. You were erased completely. And tonight, we're going to walk through exactly how that happened. This belief controlled how Egyptians lived, loved, and behaved. What they ate, who they slept with, how they treated others, because every choice followed them into death, even desire, even pleasure. The gods were watching long after your body stopped breathing. Tonight, you'll hear what they believed happened after the final breath, the journey of the soul, the judgment of the heart, the creature that ate failures, and why even kings, surrounded by gold and lovers, feared death more than the poor. The ancient Egyptians believed the soul was not one thing. It was divided. There was the ka, your life force, the ba, your personality and desires, and the ok, what you became if everything went right. If anything went wrong, the system collapsed. This is why the body mattered so much. The soul needed somewhere to return. If the body rotted, the soul wandered. No body meant no afterlife, which meant nothing. So they preserved the body obsessively. Organs were removed. The brain was pulled out through the nose. The body was dried, wrapped, perfumed, and sealed. Not for beauty, for survival. Because eternity depended on good preservation. There is something almost funny about that. The soul could travel worlds, but still needed a well-maintained address. Sex was also dangerous. The Egyptians believed desire was powerful, sacred, but uncontrolled desire disrupted balance. The gods were openly sexual. They cheated. They created life constantly. Humans, however, were judged for losing control. Divine indulgence was forgiven. Human indulgence was remembered. After burial, the soul entered the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. This was not fire or torture. It was worse. A shifting maze of darkness, rivers, gates, and monsters. Some paths were safe. Others ended everything. Creatures waited in the Duat. Snakes with knives for faces. Beings that fed on souls. Guardians who demanded passwords. Yes, passwords. If you didn't know the correct words, you didn't pass. This is why the dead were buried with spells, maps, instructions. The Book of the Dead was not poetry. It was a survival guide. It told you what to say, who to flatter, and which gods absolutely did not enjoy sarcasm. But knowledge wasn't enough. The Duat tested patience, restraint, fear. Some texts suggest souls could be distracted by comfort, familiar pleasures, memories of life. Lingering too long was dangerous, because judgment waited. Eventually, the soul reached the Hall of Two Truths. This was the moment everything led toward. At the center stood Osiris, god of the dead, silent, watching. Nearby stood Anubis, jackal-headed, and unforgiving. Before them stood the scale. On one side, your heart, not symbolically, literally. The heart held memory, guilt, desire, and intention. Every lie, every indulgence. On the other side, a single feather. The feather of Mat. Truth, order, balance. If your heart was lighter, you passed. If it was heavier, something else happened. Before the scale tipped, you were allowed to speak. This was the negative confession. You declared everything you had not done. I have not stolen. I have not murdered. I have not caused suffering. The gods already knew the truth. This was not discovery. It was confirmation. Waiting beside the scale was Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, 3 deadly animals combined into one. She was not a god. She was a consequence. If your heart failed, Anubis gave a signal. Your heart fell from the scale, and Amit ate it. No torture, no punishment. You were erased. The soul ended. This was the Egyptian idea of hell. Those who passed judgment entered the field of reeds. Paradise, a perfect version of life on earth. Fields, homes, food. But there was a catch. You still had to work. To avoid eternal labor, Egyptians were buried with Shabdi figurines, small servants meant to come alive in the afterlife. If the gods called your name for work, the Shabdi answered instead. Even in paradise, no one wanted overtime. Eternity in the field of reeds was not chaos. It was order. The Egyptians believed paradise only worked if balance was maintained. Too much pleasure became dangerous. Too much desire became disruptive. Even the afterlife had rules. Freedom existed, but only within order. This was Maat, and Maat never stopped watching. The dead still ate. They still drank. They still desired comfort, but excess was forbidden. Too much indulgence risked imbalance, and imbalance always led back to judgment. Eternity was not reckless joy. It was controlled peace. The Egyptians imagined paradise as familiar for a reason. They didn't want surprises. After monsters, judgment, and soul-eating creatures, what they wanted most was normality, a home, a routine. Even the afterlife needed to feel safe. The gods were always present, not hovering, not shouting, watching. Osiris ruled quietly. Anubis measured calmly. The dead were not punished endlessly. They were simply expected to behave forever. Pleasure still existed in the afterlife, but without secrecy. There was no hiding from the gods. Desire was allowed, as long as it remained balanced, which made the afterlife strangely intimate and completely exposed. The Egyptians believed the dead could reunite with loved ones, spouses, family, but relationships were different. Jealousy disrupted Maat. Possession disrupted balance. Love survived, but obsession did not. This belief shaped how Egyptians lived while alive. They avoided excess. They practiced restraint, not because pleasure was evil, but because eternity remembered everything. Some texts suggest souls could still fail in the afterlife. Not dramatically, quietly, by drifting, by forgetting rituals, by neglecting balance. Eternity was not automatic. It required maintenance. This is where fear returned, because eternity was not guaranteed forever. The field of reeds was stable, but not indestructible. Without remembrance, the soul weakened, and weakness led to disappearance. Memory mattered more than worship. If the living spoke your name, you endured. If they stopped, you faded. This is why tombs were filled with inscriptions. The dead begged the living to remember them. Erasing a name was the cruelest punishment imaginable. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't pain. It was annihilation. Without your name, your soul had no anchor. Some Egyptians feared that even paradise was temporary, that eventually all names would fade and all souls would disappear. This was the final, unspoken fear. Not judgment, but silence. This is why the Egyptians built monuments, why they carved stone, why they wrote endlessly. They were fighting time itself, trying to outlive forgetting, trying to stay real. They laughed, they loved, they desired, but always with caution, Because pleasure was temporary, judgment was permanent. Even kings feared this. Gold did not guarantee balance. Power did not lighten the heart. Only behavior mattered. And the gods were unimpressed by status. This belief made Egyptians deeply human. They prepared, they worried, they hoped. They didn't chase immortality blindly. They tried to earn it. In the end, the afterlife was not about reward. It was about continuation. To exist, to be remembered, to remain balanced. That was eternity. Because in ancient Egypt, death was not the enemy. Forgetting was, and the heart never stopped being judged. The Egyptians feared one thing more than pain, more than monsters. They feared being forgotten. If your name vanished, your soul weakened. This is why names were carved in stone. Because in ancient Egypt, death was easy. It was what came after that truly mattered.